Well, this week's parasha is Mishpatim, and it begins with Va'ele HaMishpatim, and these are the judgments that you shall set before them. Because it begins with and, it suggests that it's connected to the previous portion, Yitro, in which we read that God had personally inscribed the 10 Commandments in stone and gave them to Moshe at Mount Sinai. Moshe would then bring them to the people who were waiting for him to come back down from a mountain which shook with thunder. It was covered in cloud and smoke with the sound of the shofar blasting from the heavens. It was an awesome experience. Nothing like that had ever happened before, nor would ever happen again. These people were a mixed multitude of both native-born descendants of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and the stranger among us. These commandments were given to all humanity. Now, the 53 judgments, the Mishpatim, were given to people who had just been set free from slavery and who would now begin a slow process of being weaned from their past. Although their lifestyle was quite different from ours, the principles of slavery remain the same. We can still be slaves of our past. And many of us are still slaves today to tyrannical bosses, to our own workaholism or other addictions, to politicians, to religious leaders, to various ideologies, and lately to Big Pharma with its medical puppets, etc. The Creator wants us to be free. And in Mishpatim, he will show us that with freedom comes responsibility. The Mishpatim would bring application to the original 10 Commandments. And since there was no social media in biblical days, they were passed down from generation to generation by word of mouth. The Creator used a special technique to make it easier for us to memorize them. It was called mnemonics, which can only be seen in the Hebrew. For example, do not misuse the name of the Lord your God. In Hebrew, the words are, now listen, Lo tisa et Shem Adonai leshav. Tisa et Shem Adonai lechecha leshav. Now here, the Mishpat, the judgment in chapter 23:1 says, Lo tisa shema shav. The same words, meaning you shall not raise a false report. It's easy to see that this judgment was referring to the third commandment. Another example of this technique we find in chapter 22, verses 15 and 17 to 17. If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay a dowry for her to be his wife. Now, this is followed by, you shall not allow a sorceress to live. What does a virgin have to do with a sorceress? Well, in the world of idolatry, a sorceress had to be a virgin to keep her powers intact. The last example that I'm going to use is found in chapter 23, verse 19. The best of the first fruits of your land you shall bring into the house of the Lord your God. Immediately followed by, you shall not boil a kid in its mother's milk. What do first fruits have to do with boiling a kid in its mother's milk? It stems from a Canaanite fertility rite of that day. The first fruit didn't only refer to vegetation. In this case, it referred to the fruit of the womb. Here, the Creator was emphasizing that he is the only one who can make us fertile, not any pagan god. However, sadly, from this verse, our sages invented the law prohibiting us from eating milk and meat together. This has nothing to do with that. It was about idolatry and superstition. Why would this technique of mnemonics be of any importance to us? Well, for me, in my opinion, it demonstrates that like a loving father, God wants us to remember in order to obey his words. Religious mystics love to say that his words are so deep that only a few chosen can reach their level. Yet in Deuteronomy 30, verse 14, it says, no, the word is very near you. It's in your mouth and in your heart so that you may obey it. The Torah teaches us to be practical and down to earth, but it does not leave out the beauty of the mystical, as we read here in Exodus 24. I love this verse. And they saw the God of Israel. Under his feet, there was the likeness of a pavement of sapphire, like the very sky for clarity. Wow, it takes my breath away. That's why I wore my sapphires today. In Mishpatim, we read the boundaries of the land that the Lord has allotted to us. It was much larger than the small piece of land that is Israel today. He told us that although we would have to fight for it, he would be with us all the way as we slowly took it over from our enemies. We were not to follow the idolatry of the people who lived in that land. And he told us what would happen both when we obeyed and when we disobeyed. If we obeyed, he would keep all the enemies away from us and all the diseases away from us. Twice at the end of this portion, the people who were gathered at Mount Sinai, our forefathers, our ancestors, they said, all that the Lord has spoken, we will do. Have we done that? When we give our word, it is vital that we keep it. It can even affect generations after us. Here we are told to allow the land to lie fallow every 7th year. We didn't do that for 490 years. So God allowed King Nebuchadnezzar to take us captive to Babylon, where we would remain for 70 years. Do the math. God will have his way with his land, with or without his people. There's a high price to pay for our disobedience, but the flip side is that obedience brings such blessings upon us. Now, going back to the 5th commandment, chapter 20, verse 15 and 18 says, he who strikes his father or his mother shall be put to death. He who insults or reviles his father or his mother shall be put to death. These may sound harsh, but to honor our parents results in our living long in the land, or in other words, building a strong society based on the model of a healthy family. God is our creator. He is our father, and we are his children. He made man in his image, and the only people to whom he gave the ability to bring life into this world is our father and our mother. They hold a very special role, and by getting rid of their role, we are destroying this world. Our parents represent the closest thing to God on earth. They gave us life, and here we are told to honor them. God doesn't say we need to love them or to agree with their lifestyle. After all, they're simply human beings with faults and frailties like any of us. We have no right to judge them. We leave that to God. But how do we honor them after they are gone? We do that by forgiving them. I've spoken to many people who say that they could never forgive their father or their mother for what they did to them, even after they'd been dead for many years. But who are they hurting? Only themselves. By eliminating the gender of our parents, male and female, father and mother, and by removing the understanding that there is a higher authority, we are destroying the foundation of our civilization. We are not a friend to our children. We are their parents, and hopefully a good role model. Mishpatim goes into a lot of detail about what to do if a person caused injury or death to another person. It emphasizes responsibility towards others in society. As the nation of Israel was being formed, we had to grow up to progress from being self-centered individuals to thinking collectively. God wants us to be responsible for one another. If we only did that, we wouldn't need most of the social services that the governments now have to provide. That comes in the guise of socialism, which sounds wonderful because it promises to take care of us. but in truth, it enslaves us to the state. The Torah teaches us that if we cause an injury, which results in a person having to recuperate at home, we need to take care of them until they are restored to health. Today, this is done by insurance companies. The Torah emphasizes justice, and people need to take responsibility when they injure either a person or any of their property. It's called making reparation. Exodus 21, verse 37 states, "If a man shall steal an ox or a sheep and kill it or sell it, he shall restore 5 oxen for one and 4 sheep for one sheep." This shows us that even a thief must be held responsible for his actions. He not only had to return what he stole, but also include the cost of damages due to the stress he caused. In a society in which we are accountable to each other, there needs to be a bet din, a house of judgment, which consists of an honest tribunal under God to judge cases involving all types of law. This goes back to the 12 tribes of Israel having to appoint judges and setting up courts of law in Deuteronomy 16:18. You shall appoint magistrates and officials for your tribes in all the settlements that the Lord your God is giving you, and they shall govern the people with due justice. These regulations form the basis of our justice system. But sadly, they have now been lost because the 10 Commandments have been removed from our courtrooms. It's time to bring them back where they belong. Imagine what the world would be like if the United Nations lived by these. Our Rabbi, Percy, was particularly interested in this principle for our community. And I believe that it is still something that we need to be faithful to as much as we can. Being accountable for one another is very difficult, especially when most of us only meet on Zoom. However, he taught us how important it is to confront another person who may have hurt us and not sweep it under the rug or gossip about them to another person. Over the last 32 years here, I've had to be confronted by someone I hurt, or I had to speak to someone about what they were doing. It's never easy to muster up the courage and the humility to speak to people directly in a way that builds them up. It's far easier to go to someone else to state our case so that we can feel justified about our position. This can turn into gossip, and we need to be so careful about that. It is a spiritual sickness that comes upon the soul when we bring down another person in order to bring ourselves up. This is very different than asking for wise advice about how to approach another person in order to help them. Our kavanah, our intention, is always something that we need to check very carefully. Mishpatim is about how to treat our neighbor as we would want to be treated. The idea of midah keneged midah, measure for measure, is real. Most people don't understand why bad things happen to us, but for the most part, we bring it upon ourselves. We were not called to be judges of one another's behavior, which is why Rabbi Yashuv told us to take the log out of our own eye before we try to remove the speck from someone else's. This, however, does not mean that we do not have the right and the responsibility to kindly challenge each other when we see that someone we care about is doing something wrong. It is our duty as children of God, because we are in a family, His family. Is it easy? Absolutely not. Is it necessary? Absolutely yes. Mishpatim teaches us to bring in the best fruits, to bring our best fruits into the house of the Lord. Those who are tied to their pockets will always suffer because it becomes a matter of trust. This is a community. It is not a social club. It is a congregation in which we are called to help one another. We are to respect one another. We are to care for the widows, the orphans, and the foreigners among us. That is the most vulnerable among our people, which is why we need the resources to provide for those as well as to fulfill our mandate. Our Creator gave us the 10 Commandments, and these mishpatim help us to understand how to apply them to our lives. With God at the helm, we have everything we need to live a good life, to have a healthy relationship with Him, with ourselves, and with one another, in love and truth. It may be a tough journey, but with God, nothing is impossible. Shabbat Shalom.